Hola amigos, bienvenidos al Circuit Ascari in Malaga, Spain. We are here with the 2017. Wait a minute, isn't it 2015? We've been driving 2016 cars. I guess we lost 2016. Anyway, 2017 Mercedes-Benz C63s AMG Coupe. Whew. That is a lot of names, but it is a very important car. We are here at this amazing track, my first time to drive this. We're also going to drive the C300 Coupe, but we'll get to that in another episode. So while we're working on the full episode, why don't you and I do a tech review of this car, and I highly suggest you belt in and get a notebook or something like that, because there's a lot to go over. And with that, let's start with the most important part, the engine. Okay, so right from the top, we need to cover something rather important. There are two different models here. There is a C63 and there is a C63s, and it all has to do with the engine and really how much of a nut job you are. So basically, there is the C63, that is the base run-of-the-mill model, if you could even call it that, and that has a measly 469 horsepower that comes in at 5,500 RPM, and then an equally measly 479 pound-feet of torque, which comes in at a very low 1,750 RPM. Now, if that is not enough power to get you anywhere around a track or to go for a bagel run for the wife, you can get this one, the C63s. This is 503 horsepower, which also comes in at 5,500 RPM, and 516 pound-feet of torque, which also comes in at 1,750 RPM. Now, a couple of important things here. Notice the turbos, they sit in the V. Now, you're probably thinking, is that related to the engine in the AMG GT? And the answer is yes, but there are some changes. Like, for example, the intercoolers sit here as opposed to here. And also the AMG GT, that's a side oiler, so it's a dry sump lubrication. This is a wet sump lubrication. So the engine is physically taller in this one. Obviously there's a higher hood line, so you can kind of get away with it. In the full episode, when we come back for the full episode, which will come next week, we see this engine naked. So make sure you come back and check that out, and you can see where all the placements of the intercoolers, and you can see the dry sump lubrication versus the wet sump there. Now, I think, I kind of lied to you guys earlier. I said, let's start with the most important part. And it's always important when you're talking about a 500 horsepower lump underneath the hood. But we need to talk about driving dynamics. And I think the changes here probably more important to this car than the engine, if that's possible. Now you're looking at this and probably thinking the engineers or the designers got in a room in Stuttgart and basically lopped off two doors, put in a fast backlight, threw in a fancy motor, and voila, you have a C63s Coupe. But how long have we been doing this show? The Germans, never the easy way. Virtually every panel here is different. Most of the mechanicals and the suspension are different. Like, for example, riddle me this. What does a Porsche and a C63s have in common? If you said the Sport Chrono package, you would be correct. Now, remember the Porsche Boxster GTS episode? It's more than just a fancy clock to make the Sport Chrono package. Effectively, the big difference is the adjustable engine mounts, and this car does have the adjustable engine mounts that come out of the AMG GT. And effectively what they do is balance between a supple ride and stiffness of the overall car. So for example, driving from like Malaga city center all the way up to here, you can be in a dynamic mode of like eco or comfort, and the car will ride more supple. But if you want to be on the circuit, you want the car as stiff as possible to go around corners as fast, because you don't want any flex. By having the adjustable engine mounts, you can make the overall car stiffer. Get it? But wait, there's more. The front suspension, you would think they would leave it from the C63 sedan, but of course no. They added a cross member to the subframe, and then the knuckle, the upper, and the bearing all different here, including the bushings. And then back here, you would think they would have taken the subframe assembly, all of that from the C63 sedan, and call it a day, but again, never the easy way. This case, they didn't just add pieces to it, they just threw out the whole subframe from the sedan, created a new one, made it out of a different type of steel, changed the bushings in the rear, and then it's got different bearings back here as well, and of course, the dampers are different. Now, think about this for a minute. You got a lot more suspension underneath here, so you need to cover it somehow. So we got to take a look at the overall body to see what they changed. Okay, so the first thing we notice about the exterior is you look at the rear end of this thing and you say, oh, it looks like an S-Class coupe. Now, there is a lot that goes in to grafting the proportions of a large car onto a C-segment car. So normally, you would take a design like this and you would say, you know what, it really doesn't work because you don't have the physical length to pull off the rear end like this. But somehow the designers were able to do this. I think it has a lot to do with the fast backlight and the width of the car. And that's really the biggest change that we have with the C63s. Now, you guys know I'm a frustrated designer, and I could go on for hours about the design and the proportions and how this shares the proportions, or the rear end at least, of an S-Class coupe. But there's a very specific reason why it does. Like, for example, how many panels does this share with the C coupe? Basically, 3. Actually, not even basically, really, it's only 3. It is the roof, the doors, and the trunklet. And one could argue the trunklet is different because of the spoiler back here. But then, remember we talked about that suspension system, how it's totally different. Well, you need to cover that suspension system because now you have an extra 2.5 inches of width in the front, more than 2.5 inches of width in the rear. So that's basically accomplished by a totally different fender here that bows out. And then the quarter in the rear, this bows out as well. But notice the wheels are flush with the body. And then take a look at the hood. So once again, the hood is different, and this one has these bulges here. So if you step back and put aside design proportions, all these little changes to the suspension, the body, the engine, even the bushings, and really, it's more than the sum of its parts. To the point where we are going to take this on the Ascari circuit next week, so make sure you come back for that episode. And in that full episode, you're going to see some X-rated bits here. We're going to see the engine, we're going to see the suspension bits, we're even going to see the body in white. And that's going to come out next week. Now, until then, I want to leave you guys with a question. You and I have spent a lot of time with cars like these. Let's see, we haven't yet driven together the M4, although I have driven it. Then we've driven Dave's crazy ATS-V, and now this, the C63s, which we will drive next week. So let's put aside the driving dynamics of those 3 cars. Just from a design perspective, which one would you choose? The Mercedes, the BMW, or the ATS-V? And actually, for good measure, I will even throw in Yaguchi-san's RCF as a choice. Let me know which one you would choose, why you would choose it, and what region of the world you live in. Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to leave you with 2 things. Number 1, we are going to come to you from Malaga, Spain with not just an episode on the C63s, we're also going to drive the C300, which is the 4-cylinder turbo car. And then, of course, I want to leave you with, you can get our show now to your iOS device or your Google Android device for free by downloading it at the Apple iTunes Store or Google Play. And until I see you guys next week, bis später.